Welcome to this extraordinary conversation. A remarkable group of people came together 30 years ago to talk about visions for the next 500 years. Included in that was a powerful statement. We envision that in 500 years, indigenous peoples will be here, protecting and living with Mother Earth in our own lands. We see a future of coming generations of Native people who are healthy in body and spirit, who speak Native languages daily, and who are supported by traditional extended families. That idea brings us together today. The Morning Star Institute and ICT are happy to collaborate on this national check-in about that vision, framing a conversation about how far we've come in the past 30 years and what's needed in the centuries ahead. The American Academy of Arts and Sciences describes Suzanne Harjo as arguably the most consistent and effective advocate for Native American rights over the last 5 decades. She has, of course, been executive director of the National Congress of American Indians and is now president of the Morning Star Institute. She's also a regular contributor to ICT, including her most recent piece, A Remembrance of Mikhail Gorbachev. If you haven't seen it, don't miss it. Suzanne, I'll turn this over to you to get started, and I understand we'll all introduce ourselves at that point. So
Thank you, Mark, and I'm so happy to be doing this with ICT, and I can't think of a better match. As you always say about me, I've written for every incarnation of Indian country today, going back to Lakota times, and happy to have done that and to have that longevity with the organization now it is. So thank you very much. The Our Visions group was co-chaired by Oren Lyons and myself, and all the hard work was done by Jody Archambault, who organized us, who coordinated everything. And I hope she'll be able to join us today. And in this reflection, kind of looking back and looking forward, one thing I would like to do is ask each person who's on now to introduce themselves, because some of us know each other, some of us don't, and to say what your relationship is to the Our Visions gathering that was held in October 1992, or in relation to the lawsuit, which was a major priority of the 1992 alliance against the vile name of the Washington football team that was filed in September 1992. So there are people from each group, and there are some crossovers, and then some people are here as people who were around during that time, or maybe not real active at that time, but who can ask questions of those of us old timers. So if we could start with Norbert Hill.
Oh, well, thank you, Suzanne, for inviting me. I was one of the 1992 original plaintiffs, but was not able to join you in the first visioning session. So will be catching up to all the rest of you, I suppose. I'm a member of the Oneida Nation of Wisconsin. In a former life, I was the director of the American Indian Science and Engineering Society for 15 years, and then worked as the director of the American Indian Graduate Center in Albuquerque. Then always encouraging young kids, when they finish college, they should go home and fix anything, but just go home. And then so I took my own advice, then moved back to Oneida, Wisconsin, and for a while was the vice president of the College Menominee Green Bay campus, and then finished my career as the director of Indian education programs for my own tribe. So now I'm retired, and I get to choose to do what I want to do, and been working on blood quantum issues. So that's in a nutshell what I've been about, and glad to be with all of you today.
And just to clarify, that's blood quantum begone issues, right?
Yeah, Right, exactly, yeah. Well, it's a deeper issue of the identity that we're all dealing with, yes.
And what is the name of the book that you edited?
We did an anthology called The Great Vanishing Act, Blood Quantum and the Future of Native Nations. And the premise was that blood quantum is not sustainable over time. We had an anthology about 15 to 20 writers, and just trying to educate the community about the complexity of blood quantum, and that we may terminate ourselves with our own hand if we're not careful. So we need to be more astute about what we're doing, and that we don't make quick decisions and have bad results. So, and then we're working on volume 2. So I'm trying to figure out what we've learned in the last 3 years. I mean, people do statistics, which is arithmetic that every tribe has, but we have to get into demographics, which is the calculus of population. So trying to look forward and try to inform our people of what we're not in. And over 400 tribes are dealing with this right now with the IRA Constitution. So it's not a simple problem.
And that's something that was not many Native nations were dealing with this issue in 1992 or in the ramp up to the Columbus quincentenary. And even though, and many thought that they didn't have the right to or the authority to make a change, even though they had since the Martinez decision in the late 1970s of the Supreme Court. So there's been a lot of confusion, but there's less and less of it, and more people are making their own decisions about how to approach this. So I really thank you for the work you've been doing in this area.
I just wanted to say in closing is that young people are now engaged and they want to be part of this conversation. That might be our salvation.
I see Gabi Tayak.
Well, greetings, everybody. So I'm Gabi Tayak, and I'm Piscataway, which are the Indigenous people of Southern Maryland, DC area. I'm also a historian. Right now I'm back in academia working at George Mason University, but I also spent nearly 20 years at National Museum of the American Indian. And prior to that, and what was really formative for me in my life, really thinking about 1992, was while I was in my late teens, early 20s at Cornell, actually in a program that believed in the full circle. It really was one that was another wave of having us who were going into higher education. I was an undergraduate, that we would go back home, and back home for me happens to be DC. But also at that time, I became highly engaged with hemispheric indigenous movements in Central America. I traveled through Central America, South America, the Andes and the Amazon. And in the late 80s and leading up to 92, actually, that was a tremendous surge of movement through Ecuador, through like coming out of the civil wars, and that formed me very deeply. And so I was very involved actually with those movements, and then linking in. And I remember what you were doing. I remember, Suzanne, we talked at that time. I think I was probably like 22 or 23 years old, and up at Harvard, just starting my graduate program, and knowing that we had to, in all different directions, make a shift. So I was the part of the group that was on the outside, pushing, protesting, but also very much involved, I think, through the course of my life because of the Washington football team's name and growing up in DC, and around DC. That was always there, and something that was also much more engaged in process. So over these 30 years, now we're in this next generation. It's like, this is 30 years later. We're at this point where we've seen the turn of a full, it's a full generation plus. And how have they been formed since that time? So I'm very grateful to you who were the thought leaders, the intellectual, philosophical movement, legal action takers at that time to get to where we were. So that's how I'm at the table, and I always love to learn with you and be open to what you're doing. And I'm also on the board of the Morning Star Institute. So
Thank you so much for joining us. It took 30 years, but you finally trained the older generation along with the younger generation to always acknowledge the Piscataway as we're talking about this area in the DMV. So thank you for that. I know that was like herding cats, trying to get us all to make those acknowledgements, and that was before land acknowledgement was popular. So now you have educated a lot of us, and that is always to the good. So thank you. We have Robert Holden. Hello.
Hi, how are you?
Robert Holden has been my right-hand person for so many decades, I can't even count them. And at the National Congress of American Indians, and in the second wave of or the third wave of our lawsuits, and he's the former deputy director at NCAI, maybe one of the longest serving employees of MCAI, I think from my time in the 80s through not many years ago. Is that right?
That's correct. That's correct. Let me add that I was honored to come in to NCAI back in the early 80s, and Suzanne was there, and she was at the helm. And sometimes we were a staff. I was a staff of one. which is just amazing, the longevity, the brilliance, and being able to be around Suzanne. So as well as all of these modest people there, because they've done, everyone there that's on this Zoom has just done tremendous amounts of work. So I respect and I really think a lot highly of all of you. So it's great to be here, Suzanne. And just a little more background, if you will. Bear with me. While serving NCAI, I focused on several issues, as we all do at NCAI, including Native veterans. I was honored to be among the Native veterans there, and how we kept alive the Code Talkers medals for all Native warriors from all tribes. There are many, the Navajo that were awarded them, but nevertheless, there are so many tribes that were some left on the battlefield, some, in all these theaters of war, but many tribes, tribal warriors served and used their language to win all these battles and these campaigns. But also, we were instrumental, NCAI was instrumental in the Native Veterans Memorial, which was had a formal ceremony recently. It's its last Veterans Day. But also focused on Homeland Security Management issues, because, while I was there, I learned that, one of the components of tribal governance is protecting the safety and security of tribal communities. And while there, worked on emergency management planning for tribal governments and communities, and doing that with a group out of LSU, an Academy of Counterterrorist Education, which we've been providing no cost training to tribal law enforcement, firefighters, and medical technicians for those events that we trained for and hope never happen. But nevertheless, it's great to be here. Thank you, Susan.
Mm. That's important work. Thank you so much. Do I see Phil Deloria here? I think I do.
You do.
Okay, there you are. Welcome. We're just introducing ourselves, and I think we've explained that there are really several groups of people on here who are part of this, some who were at the 1992 Our Visions gathering, some who were not, but who were part of the priority of the 1992 Alliance, which was to get rid of the name of the Washington football team. So some of the people here are among the plaintiffs who filed that suit in September of 1992. And then there are other people who weren't at either place, but who were in the real world and who are here to pose questions and make points about things that have happened over these 30 years and how we might look to the future for things we wrote about in Our Vision statement and things that we didn't contemplate. On the other hand, there are things that we were working on that have now come to fruition. The Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples of the UN, for example. I think most of us were engaged in that activity, and then it happened. So there are lots of things that have already taken place that we were hard at work on. And Phil, why don't you introduce yourself and say where you come in to this world?
Well, I suspect I'm one of the historian types, right, who's going to pose a few questions, because I was not in the real world in 1992. I mean, I was in graduate school, which is, perhaps on the unreal edges of the world. So I'm a person of Dakota descent, and I think I am here, as a historian. I teach history, Native American history and American history at Harvard. I've been here since 2018. Before that, I was in the University of Michigan, and before that at the University of Colorado, where I actually was on the same faculty as my father, Vine Deloria Jr. We shared an office in his final semester of teaching, which was quite a fun and wonderful thing. My dad was part of the lawsuit, was part of the plaintiff collection of plaintiffs, along with Norbert Hill, who it's so good to see. And I just have to say, Norbert actually gave me my very first writing job. I don't know if he remembers this, but writing a little report on the ACES convention for Winds of Change, which I was quite pleased to do. So Norbert, it's so great to see you. I should also say, Norbert, was the person who recruited me to the Board of Trustees of the National Museum of the American Indian. And I've just finished 12 years worth of, a term as a trustee, 4 terms actually, together. It was great for me to cross paths with Gabby, as well. I served as the chair of the repatriation committee for a lot of years, and at all the institutions I've been involved with, repatriation's really been kind of central on my agenda, and it's certainly one of the things that I'm pushing really quite hard at Harvard. And also, I should just say, in terms of Harvard, it's a complicated institution. It's a world historical institution, though. And I think the more that we can indigenize a place like Harvard, the better off we'll all be. So we have a incoming class this year of 60 Native students in our first year class, which is something that's never happened in this place before. And I have to think that has something to do with the kind of things that we've been trying to build around Native faculty and Native affiliated and adjacent kinds of faculty there. So, I teach kind of the core parts of the curriculum. I teach the Intro to Native American and Indigenous Studies class. I teach the Graduate Historiography class, and I teach 3 different research seminars, including a seminar that we're just wrapping up on Harvard and Native lands, where we're digging deep into the records of Harvard University and sort of looking at its 17th century land acquisitions, sort of our own version of the land grabs university kind of project on a kind of small and local sort of thing. And then Suzanne, and Norbert, I will just mention, I literally just finished yesterday teaching from your book on blood quantum. And so Suzanne, we were literally reading Blood Quantum Be Gone, the vampiric effects, of blood quantum. So it's just so good to be, in company and communion with everybody here today. So I'm just pleased to be here.
Oh, thank you so much. Yes, Phil Deloria. We, in 1992, we didn't have your books, which have been so important to the identity issues in many respects. Who are we kinds of things, and how do we get the fakes out of the world, out of our world? And when I think about the tools that we didn't have in 1992, I'm surprised that we were able to move ahead as much as we did. Stephanie Freiberg, for example, hadn't done her studies, which were so important to the mascot issue or the no mascot movement. And there are things like that. In 1992, NAGPRA was just a toddler, wasn't even 2 years old. And look where we've come. And in repatriation, there's been so much progress that it's been astounding. I mean, we can go back to that in the next round, but I just wanted to point that out, that work is so intensive all across the country and becoming more and more so as greater numbers of holding repositories realize they're holding repositories, and that they have a law that whose mandate is to repatriate. It's not to hold everything in place for the state, for the holding repositories, it's to return things. So this is work that you're actively involved in, and in making these huge institutions turn around, which is a mighty task. Thank you very much. Mary Catherine Nagel, I think, was the next person who joined us. Hello, Mary Catherine.
OCO, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Mary Catherine. I'm a citizen of the Cherokee Nation, and I was 9 years old in 1992. So I wasn't even in grad school. And so obviously I had nothing to do with the incredible vision that was espoused in 1992. But I will say that I have been a student of Suzanne's for quite some time now, and a fan of many people here today. I mean, I can't tell you how helpful, Phil, your work has been, and your scholarship. And I mean, everyone on this call has impacted my life in some shape or form. And I think too, the vision and also the lawsuits have been incredibly inspiring in so many ways, not just for changing mascots, but also for just showing what we're able to do together, that, it may not happen overnight, but, we do, these movements build and they pass on to the next generation, and they inspire people, and then change happens. And so I've been just inspired by everyone here and feel very honored to be here with you all today. So thank you.
And I have to make a self-serving statement. Not only are you a great playwright, but you and I are co-playwrights on not one, but two plays, and one about Jim Thorpe, and trying to get him back to Oklahoma, where he wanted to be buried, as he expressed so often in his lifetime, on Sac and Fox land. And he almost was, but his last of three wives came in in the middle of ceremony at Sac and Fox and took his body and ended up driving him to Pennsylvania and trying to sell him, and iced him down to keep him from melting, I guess. So that was a really amazing play to do, and then one that is a work in progress because history keeps taking over, called Reclaiming One Star. And we'll perhaps go into some of that later, but thank you, Mary Catherine, for that wonderful collaboration.
Well, I thank you for agreeing to work with me and trusting me with these, incredible stories that and lives and missions that you've been working on for your entire life. So it's been a privilege and an honor, and we're not done.
That's right. We're not done yet. I think I see my son, Duke Harjo. Come into court and introduce yourself.
Hey everyone. God, introduce myself. Hi, I'm Duke. I'm Mom's son, Suzanne's son. I've got World Cup in the brain right now. This is one of my favorite times of the year. I'm a huge football fan. The other football, the real football, the one you actually use your feet with. And it's sport I love. It's a sport I coach quite a bit. But I was thinking about it in terms of this introduction, that for most of my life, I've spent being inside of a stadium, watching much of this work occur. But I started off as a ball boy, right? Just like on the sideline, fetching balls, kind of observing and watching and learning and watching some of the giants. I mean, Mom, of course, but Norbert, I remember Norbert when I was just a little one and just constantly looking up to him. And I remember some of our conversations being about this ACEs. And of course, being the son of a poker player and mom, I thought he was saying ACEs, ACES. So I was like, yeah, that's great. I like ACEs. ACEs are good. But then so like my relationship is so different. And Robert, who has known me for, I would say, almost my entire life, just watching these people move and operate and seeing how they think, learning how they think, to the point where now I have kind of lived a life not on the field. I have lived a life on the sideline. I've lived a life as like the assistant to the assistant to the assistant to the assistant coach, if Mom is one of those coaches. And that has been my role, observing, learning, thinking, and then kind of affecting in my own little ways. But it has been something I've been doing my entire life, and it's something I love doing. I love being involved. I love being on calls like this, mainly because it feels like home. This is what it was like to be a kid. This was what it was like to be in our living room, to be at Mom's office, at Robert's office. Just kind of curled up in the corner, fly on the wall, watching, breaking down tape, kind of thing. Anyway, so that's kind of my relationship to all of this, is that I've been a fly on the wall for a very long time, and I'm just privileged and honored to be here.
My son is very modest. He has been indispensable at many, many key times, and I certainly appreciate every time that he has stepped forward and stepped up, and enjoy watching what he is doing as he raises my grandsons and teaches them how to be good and productive and smart and courageous and not reckless. So, but Mark, I'm going to turn this back over to you. And I'm going to check my email just to make sure I didn't mislead anyone about the time we were starting.
Yeah,
Well-
quick apology for that, because the email I saw most recently said 5 o'clock. So I I thought I was logging on early, and lo and behold, here we are, full room.
I suggested we just blame Phoenix because Phoenix messes everybody up when daylight. All of our meetings were off by an hour for about the first 2 months. While we're waiting, I'll just mention my answer to the question of 1992. So I'm Mark Trahant, for those who don't know me, Shoshone Bannock, from live in Phoenix as editor, first as editor of ICT and now editor at large at ICT. In 1992, of all things, I was here in Phoenix. I was a reporter, a young reporter at the Arizona Republic. And in addition to writing about both the Washington football team and the other conferences going on around 1992 and the next 500 years, I also spent a lot of time wanting to get to know the Kalinaga and spending time in Dominica, where the first indigenous group met Christopher Columbus. And I love the conversations with that community and got to know them pretty well. And I'm still in touch with most of them about how they view both the encounter and the future. And that's just been a really rich conversation that I've been lucky enough to have. Probably written tens of thousands of words on both of these topics. So I'm not the expert, but the chronicler, and happy to ask questions anytime, any place. With that, I'll pass back to Suzanne. Or maybe. I guess while we're waiting, why don't I start with just a question and it could go to Norbert. When you first began both the lawsuit and some of the broader issues, how fast did you think things would happen and where did you see it ending up?
Well, I wasn't sure how fast it would go. I remember the original owner, not Snyder, but every time he'd say something, it played right into our hands. He was so dumb that he was an asset to us, and they finally got rid of him. But you know, I think the important thing, it brought awareness to the country and to Indian groups that we can't be stereotypes and cartoon characters, and that plays into our identity. And so, you know, I'm a football fan, but not a mascot fan. And we grown up and institutionalized ourselves to these names of the Washington football team, the Chicago Blackhawks, the Kansas City Chiefs, and those kinds of things as being normal. And so I think having this venue to talk about it and get, I know our state in Wisconsin has been very active in terms of getting high schools to change their names, and many high schools have. Some reneged on it, but there's still many others that haven't done anything yet. And so it's still a movement, a work in progress. And so I think it created a movement. It was a symbol, but it was also one that moved other people, you know, across the country, and saying that we want to be heard in the first person with our own voice. And so I wasn't sure how long it was going to take. I mean, Suzanne did this with, well, we had a champagne diet on a beer budget, and we didn't have much beer. And so, I mean, it was on nothing and on some generous time from lawyers. And I thought maybe the Redskins thought we were just going to give up and go back home. And it didn't happen, but I think that's due to Suzanne's leadership. And then we had other people join in that I don't know if they were jumping on the bandwagon, but it was the right bandwagon for them to do. And Susan's certainly responsible for that. She really has been the warrior of getting rid of that football name. And I think they'll always be cursed. I always still cheer against them. And they picked the name Commanders, which I think is terrible in and of itself. Those were the Army guys that that used to beat up on us, and so I think I don't wish them well on anything, and so anyway, that's my view.
That kind of brings up a follow-up for me, and Suzanne might want to weigh in on this too, is now that we look back, we really realize how incompetent these folks are. And you look at the other owners looking at Daniel Snyder and saying, he's embarrassing to us. Can you get rid of him? And it almost has, I mean, it's almost exacerbation by this point.
Well, the other owners must be kicking themselves because they paid for every penny of litigation for the Washington franchise from the beginning. And that, of course, that's because they were getting a share of the profits of the sale of merchandise, and the hottest sales came from the Washington franchise. But they were tricked, I think, into paying for all that litigation, and they had to take the heat for it too. And now they're seeing who it is they've been backing all this time. And it's not a pretty look. I'm not surprised that there's all the sexual harassment complaining and complaints that has been happening about the front office of the Washington football team. We were bullied. We were bullied as Native people. I was bullied as a Native woman, and they tried everything they could to, from going through our garbage to putting PIs on us and trying to, I don't know what they were looking for. I guess us sitting in a circle wearing Washington R-word shirts or something and loving the name. And but they followed us around, and we were under surveillance, and we had a lot of people who were trying to scare us. So there were paid thugs, paid fans. It was not an easy road, and lots of death threats and the like. And I had a very, very good separate lawyer who had made a lot of the stalking laws in the United States, in various states, Suzanne Jackson, and she was able to, when we knew who someone was, to take one of these stalkers and make them pay in court. I mean, they didn't have to pay anything. They just had to leave us alone. So we were able to get restraining orders against at least one, and some action against others. The one, this is the kind of message that would be left on the answering machine. So we had tapes, literally tapes that we took into court. I mean, how smart was this guy? He was leaving his name, his number, and death threats. But one of them was that he had conferred with the team that morning, and he said, look in the mirror, because this is the last time that your face is ever going to look like that again. That's a pretty specific kind of threat, and one that is more, it's a different kind of threat from the normal, I hate your guts and quit hurting my poor team and leave Dan Snyder alone, or so it was getting very, very personal, and has not ceased, even though the name has been changed. Every time there's some sort of eruption in the press, I get a death threat. So I think I'm on someone's, the tickler list for these threatening people, and with hostile fixations against Native people and anyone whose name has been associated with something they feel they're entitled to, such as racism. So, yeah, that's a whole other kind of issue. One of our other people who was part of our effort was Manly Begay. And I see that Manly and Ray Apodaca and Mateo Romero have all joined. Manly, if you could start off, I always noted during our 17 years of litigation that you would say, I'm one of the et als after Harjo et al. Versus Pro Football Inc. So I'm going to give you a chance to introduce yourself as yourself rather than one of the et als.
Thank you, Suzanne. And good afternoon, everyone. I apologize for being late. I'm living here in Flagstaff, Arizona, and behind me is the sacred mountain of the West Fork Navajo people, Toko Sleep. And it's also known as San Francisco Peaks. I don't know where San Francisco came from, you know. It's mind-boggling. But Suzanne is correct that we were in this fight. Actually, we're still in this fight to some extent. And it's really interesting how it transpired throughout the 17 years, 18 years, even to this day. I was a humble graduate student and also on faculty at Harvard when Suzanne and I met and became very good friends, and and I had just come from the Navajo Nation and went to Harvard for a doctoral program and began to quickly understand the enormity of what we had gotten into. And it's really, the enormity is really around a mindset that is deeply rooted, you know, hundreds of years back. And that mindset has not relinquished by any means, and it's sort of masked by racism, but it's sort of this deep-seated misunderstanding or misdirection or lack of understanding of Indigenous people and who we are as living human beings, you know. And I think that's why the name change took so long. And still the struggle goes on. Suzanne just sent out a note earlier about how in New York State, the battle still continues as well. And even with our own people as well, there's still this deep-seated colonial mindset that's present. Now, having said that, it seems as though it's impossible to change things. However, you can see by this particular litigation and that we did that over the years that it's not impossible. It just takes time, you know. It takes a lot of time, and I can't imagine the untold hours that Suzanne has had to go through to elevate this issue all the way through the courts and all the way across the country, if not the world. And so some real deep gratitude is offered to her by me, as well as the other et al. Litigants. And I'd like to think that at this age that I'm at, that I'm leaving the world a better place, you know. And it's really quite interesting how all of this has transpired through the years. And Norbert is actually very correct. You know, we were on a very small budget in fact, we were doing depositions in Chicago, and I think we stayed at the YMCA, and then the lawyers from the other side stayed at this swanky hotel right downtown, and we by any means we were not rolling in dough. We were sort of scrapping for things, but we had some very generous supporters and very people that were willing to stand by the cause, by justice, if you will, and so it's been quite a journey to this point in time, but I'm very honored and deeply respectful for my part in changing the mindset that has been sort of deep seated, even though it's been a real struggle. I'm glad I did it. I'm glad I'm still taking this position, and part of the reason why I did this was because when I was a young man, I was driving from Flagstaff to Window Rock. I stopped at Holbrook, Arizona, and I was with my father, and he wanted a half and half ice cream, sort of creamsicle that they call it nowadays. So I went into the store and I looked in all the freezers, and there was no half and half, and so I go up to the cashier and ask him, do you have any half and half? And he says, no. And so I said, okay. I started walking out, and he started yelling at me, screaming and yelling at me and calling me all kinds of vile names. And among that was the R word that he was expressing after many FUs, and it really, and this was during the 70s when we were all in activism mode and red power, and that was sort of the call of the land, at that time, and it had taken root in Indian country quite well. So I turned around to beat the crap out of the guy, and I went after him, and he took off while he was still yelling all kinds of names, telling me to go back to my Hogan, go back to the reservation, you stinking no good effing, this and that, and that's when I knew that this particular word is just it's not a good word. Its roots go back much more deeply, and he locked himself in the freezer. So I was pounding on the freezer, tell him, get the hell out of here, get out here, he wouldn't come out. So I just left and drove off. But that memory is still with me to this very day, thinking that we did the right thing. And this word is not, and other words are not appropriate. It's just not appropriate. It's actually demeaning, goes beyond racism. It goes up against the sense of humanity and why we're here on this earth. And I just remember that quite vividly. And so when I was given a deposition in Chicago, relate that story, and the lawyer from the other side, they're cunning. Boy, those lawyers are cunning. They string on questions all the way around to get you to make a mistake. And I wouldn't relinquish. I really enjoyed the deposition, actually. Because it was kind of like a battle. And I really liked that. And so the transcriber was typing away, and pretty soon the attorney was so upset that he couldn't track me, and he just threw down his notes, and walked out the door and never came back, Transcriber and I were sitting there wondering what's going on, what's happening here, and then she started laughing, and then I started laughing, and we both laughed, it was so funny. But it's a little bit longer introduction than I had imagined, but I'm very happy to be here, and it's good to see everyone on Zoom, and Ray. It's good to see your name on the list. Also Duke as well, and Phil and Rick. And others whom I've not met, but I know I've heard a lot about you, and it's indeed an honor and a pleasure to be sitting here with you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Manley. That was wonderful. I see that Jody Archambault has joined us, and I wonder, since she was the absolute organizing queen of our visions, and Oren and I had an idea, but she made it happen, and I wondered if you might want to reflect on our visions, our visions, and what's been done in the past 30 years. You coordinated our visions, and next thing we knew, you were the highest ranking Native woman and Native person in the administration of President Obama. And that was an extraordinary thing, and you did a fabulous job everywhere you've ever been. So let me call on you to say hello.
Okay. Thank you so much for pulling this together. This has been a tremendous journey. I think our visions, the next 500 years gathering in Taos Pueblo was one of the most, I guess, significant events that I had ever participated in, not just because of the people that were gathered there, but mostly what I would say is the markers that were put down from a perspective of a young person. I think I was probably like 22 or something like that. I think I have some great memories of some of the great orators that were, in our presence, both of the medicine people and folks like Vine Deloria. I would say that, like, I took the challenge, not really understanding what it would mean to be the staff for someone like Suzanne Harjo. And I would say that this position, like no other, prepared me to become an official in Obama's White House in 2008 until 2015. And mostly because she is, if any of you, and many of you have worked with her, she is an incredible, I guess she's an incredible warrior. That's the best way I could put it. I wouldn't say that I wouldn't want to like go toe to toe and see who could work harder, because she lives and she breathes the battles that we've been in since she was a young woman. And to be in that position of moving into a real job from college, and to have that experience, I think I worked 17-hour days, and it still felt like I couldn't keep up with her. I worked 17-hour days, and everything had to be perfectly exact the way that it was going to be. And what I didn't realize is, working in this 1 month, it was 1 month we took to prepare this. And I was working night and day. She was in DC, and just on the phone with her constantly. I didn't even know how to do a budget at the time. So you can imagine, like, 17 hours is like not working smarter, it's working harder. Like, I had to do everything at a very high level. And I just remember like watching Suzanne's contact book. And I was in awe, because she just had this contact book, and there were just all these people in it. And she would open it, and she would go through it and talk about who's going to be a part of the gathering. And it was I just had to follow up, and I didn't have to figure out who was going to be there, because she and Oren curated it in a way that was nothing short of art. The kind of mixture of people who were there, what they were going to bring forth at the meeting. She let me pick a couple of people to come, and I think they joined us, Hyde and Marla, mostly because of Hyde is a poet, and Marla is a great purveyor of, she's an art historian, and she runs the Osage Museum right now. But just having the ability to call upon some of my friends that would be able to be there and help was a huge honor. And then also she the statement that came out, like, you can have lots of people have conferences, a lot of people have gatherings, a lot of people bring people together, but what actually gets produced is another thing. And we were in this kind of like era where fax machines were still working, like people were still using fax machines. And so we did the press release after the statement was written. And I would say that there were people like Joy Harjo, Oren, Vine Deloria, the Susan Williams, the lawyer. I just remember that night when I would like to say that I was writing it, but it was really them. And I could say that, I guess, in 20 years, but it was really them who was writing it. And I got to witness geniuses, contemporary geniuses at work, shaping the words on a page to set forth a blueprint for the next 500 years. And I would say that the words that came out were not just the people in the room, but also the spiritual way that the gathering was put together in Taos, in teepees, with people like Reuben Snake, with people who were blessing, Mr. Concha from Taos, who were blessing the grounds before we got there. And so I would just say that having that, and then also at the same time, the lawsuit was coming in as like, this big battle that people were preparing for and gearing up for. That wasn't just the only topic of the discussion. It was all of these other places, not just sacred places, but these other areas of work that needed to have, I guess, a course charted. And I think this was at a time when I would say that things felt next to impossible. I mean, I would say that they felt like, I don't even think that I think museum was, what year was that passed? Suzanne, do you remember?
89.
89. So this was just on the heels of that museum, and that museum even seemed like it wasn't quite, we didn't have it physically located there yet. And I think that like all of these things that were just now coming to be, had like felt like they were never going to happen, but then they were starting to happen. So I think I agree that this was a major, not just a major influence for myself, but a major influence. I mean, I think for the all the way to the stars that this happened, and that we still have these words, and we still have these amazing people who are still doing the work. And it's done in a way that isn't necessarily, I call on the fight and the warrior side of it, but there's also a very gentle and healing side that has to do with the language and with arts and with vision that is very different from the tone that you see. You even saw anytime, back then. Like this was very much like, what does it look like what do we want to say it looks like in the future? And we've been so conditioned. I think this all has helped me in the work that I've done to really not just react to the colonial structures, the colonial systems that are in place, but to really see how we as Indigenous people can think independent, non-reactionary, from growth and a, I guess, holistic mindset, spiritually grounded mindset. And I think that all was embodied not just in the gathering, but the words that came after. It also was part of how I approach things at the White House. And when I was in the White House, I don't know, everybody on this call, if you don't know, the person that was very much in conversation with me from the time that I was even considered for the campaign was Suzanne. And it was one of those things where she told me when I was like, I think it was 19 when I met her, or 18. And she said, you're going to be a senator. And I was like, I'm not going to be a senator, but okay. But she was naming people from when I was 19 saying, you're going to do this and you're going to do that. And I'm not going to be a senator because I'm in North Dakota, but I definitely felt called upon during the various times. And she said, well, you have a family, so of course you're going to be out of the loop for a while, but we'll call you when it's your time. And so during the Obama campaign is when she called me. And I would say, like, the things that haunt me the most during the Obama administration is that I couldn't do the things, I couldn't push. I don't think we did very much in the areas that were set forth in our visions. I think we did as much as we could do at the time, but I feel like we really did fall short, especially short of what I think Suzanne had and the people at this gathering had called upon. But nonetheless, we made progress in a lot of other areas. And even though those are very significant areas that we made progress, and it's a start, and it was, it's not just a start, but a continuation of things that other people had done. I would say that the focus of culture, land, and indigenous language, indigenous perspective, like really from the myriad tribes that exist, not just one tribe, we didn't get as far as we needed to. And I wouldn't say it's, I would say that this continues to be a challenge for all of us to push and to move and to shake until we can say that we've done enough for the vision. I don't know that the work's ever going to be done. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I have to say that the Obama administration, against tremendous odds on Capitol Hill, in the country, people who didn't accept his presidency, one of whom later became president, made great gains, gaining a permanency for the Indian Healthcare Improvement Act, which we had tried for decades to do and couldn't do. And then it was done. And while we couldn't do what we needed to do and what we wanted to do on sacred places, we were able to get it in the presidential proclamations. And many of them just were right below the radar and had a lot of protections for sacred places in them. The most prominent, of course, is Bears Ears. But there were other things that happened because of the atmosphere created in the administration. And for example, changing Kearney Peak to Black Elk Peak, a tremendous change. That's a multi-generational change, and was a multi-generational effort, and it wasn't going anywhere. And then all of a sudden it did. And just the fact that the country had elected the first Black president was an amazing boost. And like any change, once it happens, then it's commonplace. Oh, okay, well, we made that milestone. That was a huge change. Day two is it's no big deal. Day one and the day before day one, it's a huge deal and it'll never happen. And is it really going to happen? And when will this happen? And then, oh, okay, well, next, what do we do next? And I liked that there were so many people, and you in leadership in the White House, Jody, that really were the people always saying, okay, here's next, here's where we go next. And just the great jurisdiction for tribal courts and tribal Native nations, period, in VAWA and the violence against women, that would not have happened, and the inherent sovereignty recognized and affirmed by Congress would not have happened had it not been for your persistence and all that you went through and sacrificed to do that tremendous job in the White House. So I'm glad to have a chance to publicly say that to you. And you mentioned Hyde Erdrich and Marla Redcorn, and I'd like to ask them to introduce themselves as two of the people that Jody wanted there especially, and who were so invaluable at the gathering and making sure that everyone was doing what they were supposed to be doing and the statement was getting ready. And look where they are. I mean, Marla heading her own tribal museum, which is a tremendous honor and a tremendous responsibility and a darn hard job. And Hyde, who just got a pushcart nomination for her new book and is such an acclaimed author, and rightly so. And please introduce yourselves.
Hawaii Baha Dashe. He inki ompa wajaji jaji abrin. Marla Redcorn Miller istanhi jaji abrin. Zane wawi huempi de combra. Sija washtaki. Dawali only minkshe. Wahakali nikashe only minkshe. Wajaji insele waleze ojutsi wapita minkshe. And I want to say welcome from the Osage Nation. I work at the Osage Nation Museum. I'm from the people, the Wahakali people of the Osage, and the Gentle Sky people. And I start off that way because one of the things that was so important to our museum and the things that we're doing here. But first, actually, even saying that, I just want to say it's such an honor to be in the presence of all of you. I mean, when I was so young and, you know, Jody and I went to college together and everything and was at that, it was something I'd written an email to Suzanne to let her know it was really a life-changing experience for me to not only be in the presence of all of those individuals, but to see how that synergy that happened. And I think what Jody said in terms of the art, you know, there's these incredible issues that are so significant to our people and land, language, economy, all of these kinds of things. And you read the statement and it brings the language and this sort of artistic, beautiful way of bringing it all and shaping it together. I think that's the heart and the spirit of these things. And really, when I was there, that's what I felt very strongly was the heart and the spirit of the people coming together, for lack of a better way of saying all of that. And it has stayed with me my whole life and the work that I've done in different areas. And one of the things I think is, you know, we're getting ready to expand our museum. And we have some architects on board, and we've been having a lot of community gatherings for that. And we've met with them our different districts of Osage people and having traditional dinners with them and meeting with them and talking to them and really shaping a vision for that. Now, I wasn't, and some of those things we brought with our mission statement for this institution when we came around to it, language being central, our core values as Osage people, our traditional concepts that we have became that thing that when people enter into our space that we want to share with them. And as I was reading when Suzanne sent that email to me and I was reading through that statement again, it was very interesting how many of the things that we foregrounded as the most important for our people when they come into our spaces for culture and language and art, that they are very similar to the things that are in that statement. And I might read just a few, and these came from our elders. Understanding and acknowledging and not understanding acknowledgement of the creation story, the Genesis, and how it shaped our people and how it has brought us to this time period. And I think looking at that 500 years, it really is a leveling thing that takes you down to those core elements of what's important to us. And then understanding and recognition of the clan system and its purpose to provide a structure that facilitates good relations and positive communication for the continued betterment of our people. I won't go through all of those things, but as I was reading through them, they're like that. And they're those kinds of things that we've had 500 years and we want to project in, to the future in terms of our programming and the way that we do things. And so I've worked in museums since then. I worked at the Museum of Indian Arts and Culture. I worked in education at the Museum of Contemporary Native Arts in Santa Fe and different projects like that. And I also worked with Cornell Chosa and Regis Pecos I got to intern for them and things like that at the Leadership Institute. And they were really instrumental as well in terms of looking at how to hone down those values and things like that. But I just wanted to say thank you so much for the time. And it's an honor to be here. And that's it. Thank you.
Thanks, Marla. It's just so good. Marla and Jody and I all went to Dartmouth, and Mateo, who was on here. And I just think about how Suzanne visited Dartmouth a few times and had such a huge influence on us. And I was there teaching for 10 weeks just got home to Minnesota. And every time I walked by a place where Suzanne gave a talk, the memories came flooding back to me and how meaningful that was. So I'm a writer and a visual arts curator, an independent scholar, which was one of the first times that was modeled to me was through Suzanne. And being included in our visions by Jody was just such a great moment for me. I just moved to Minnesota, wasn't sure what kind of work I would get. I was in my early 20s too. I just wasn't sure what I was doing. And Jody was like, well, you're not doing anything. Come down and help me. So I was able to do that, but I didn't even know what I was getting myself into. So meeting people who I'd heard about and who I admired, who later I knew throughout my life, was really just an important thing to happen for me right then. And it's really nice to see people too. I've got to shout out Norbert Hill. Hi, Norb. Nice to see you. It's been a few years. Yeah, and I mean, those things they're personally very meaningful to me, but they also galvanized me in understanding how artists and creative people are the heart of our activism, that we need to uphold that as equal to everything else, and really to go outside doing things their way, doing things the colonial way or no way. I mean, these were the things that were absolutely necessary to us, and having creative ways of approaching things. And that just really, fueled what I did. I came back to Minnesota after the heady days of running down to pick people up at the airport, going make photocopies, collating things, doing everything, an elder wrangling. That was one of my jobs. I have a poem about it in my first book. Hopi elder chooses a pop when Thomas Bagnacco wanted a pop that wasn't in the machine. And I had to get it for him. So yeah, I was just, after I did all that, I came to Minnesota, which I knew was going to be my home. And one of the first things I did was figure out where I could find ways to continue to be an artist, to be a writer, and support action. And, it was during the walleye wars. So I, went into that realm, started working with organizations, making things for public actions, and really was able to feel like it was my role to support, and that there would always be a need for that. That wasn't something that would ever go away. Whereas sometimes your leadership wanes, but you're always going to need somebody to uphold you and encourage people to show up. And so I felt, there was so many ways I could do that, both as a teacher and as an artist and part of the community. But I really didn't have that model growing up, or really understand that it could be national, what we were doing at college, until I met Suzanne. Then I was like, what? There's a world out there where they're fighting an Indian symbol too. It's not just us, we're not just the cranky Indians up at Dartmouth. But there's a national conversation to be had here, pursued, and a lot of other stuff is going to flow with it. That was just so clear to me in writing and reading that Our Vision statement. So I'm super grateful, and I it's definitely a lifetime experience. So I want to thank you all.
Thank you so much, Hyde. And since you mentioned Mateo Romero as one of your Dartmouth alums, I'm going to ask him if he would introduce himself. He was at Our Visions, of course, as an artist, but also as our youngest plaintiff in the lawsuit against the Washington team. And that lawsuit was only a month old, and it would last for 17 years, which means that it was a viable, legit case. I think the Washington football team thought it would just go away, and it would that it was a frivolous lawsuit. Well, you don't stay in court for 17 years on a frivolous lawsuit. And we assigned ourselves the roles of the responsible adult population, and went ahead and pursued this matter, and lots of other things. So Mateo Romero, come into court.
He may have had to drop out. I don't see his name up.
Oh, my word.
Yeah. He
Oh,
was there earlier.
Oh,
but-
no.
Yeah, I
You're
don't see him.
Well, we'll ask our other co-plaintiff, Ray Apodaca. And I'm going to email Mateo. Ray, would you introduce yourself? And Ray was, in addition to being a co-plaintiff, was also an area vice president. He was the governor of his pueblo, and he was an area vice president for the National Congress of American Indians, which was an important liaison there between our lawsuit and the and NCAI, so that he could make sure that, as a matter of NCAI policy and practice, that we were together in the enterprise, and then was just one of the stalwarts. I mean, we all hung together for 17 years, and Vine as long as he could till 2005. And I guess since then he's been helping us from elsewhere. So Ray, if you're there and listening, please introduce yourself. There you are. Glad to see you.
I'm glad to be here and to see some old friends, a lot of people who over the years helped me, inspired me, encouraged me, and a lot of other people in Indian country. As Suzanne pointed out, at the time that she contacted me about the Washington team, I was doing three things, which I think were to me very important. One, I was governor of Isleta del Sur Pueblo, my tribe. I was the Albuquerque area NCAI vice president, and I was also the chair of the NCAI Human Rights, Religious, and Cultural Concerns Committee. And in fact, in that position, I would actually serve for 16 years. And a lot of that was because of Suzanne Harjo. She encouraged me and supported me and motivated me and was a great counsel and great encouragement to me in that. And I'm so grateful that she did that she encouraged me to be there, to be involved. You know, I can, just to give you a little snippet, a little short thing that I always remembered. Isleta del Sur Pueblo is the only Pueblo other than the Hopis that is not in New Mexico. It's actually in Texas. It's right outside of El Paso, Texas. And my ancestors ended up there as a result of the Pueblo Revolt of 1680. We're the descendants of the Pueblo people from several Pueblos, but primarily from Isleta Pueblo, New Mexico, who were taken hostage by the Spanish in their retreat in 1680. And after getting my master's degree, I was invited to go back to Isleta del Sur Pueblo and served my people there as education director and later as a reservation administrator, and then moved on to become executive director of the Texas Indian Commission for 7 years. And my first experience in the Texas legislature kind of set the tone for me and how I was going to be dealing with the Texas government. And literally the second day after I became executive director of Texas Indian Commission, I had to go before the state Senate, the Finance Committee, to talk about the appropriations for my agency, for my department. And I got everything I could, and I prepared myself. I took a stack of documents with me and went right in, and I determined I'm going to really blow these people away. I'm going to talk about the Indians in the state of Texas. At that time, Texas had the 5th largest Indian population in the United States, 95% of which was urban. There's only 3 small reservations in Texas: the Alabama Coshada in East Texas, the Kickapoo, traditional Kickapoo in South Central Texas, and Isleta del Sur Pueblo out in the extreme west near El Paso. And so I gave my testimony and went through the whole thing. And I thought I had done such a great job. I'm sitting there about to pat myself on the back. And I asked, are there any questions? And this one senator looks at me and he says, you just finished talking about Indians. Indians this and Indians that, and Indians in Texas and all over says, I thought we killed you all off or sent you to Oklahoma years ago. Where'd you come from? And so in my best composure, I told him, I said, you know, we have been here a few hundred years longer than your ancestors were. And the majority of those Indians in the urban centers in Dallas and Houston and Fort Worth and El Paso and Amarillo and wherever are originally from Texas. Yeah, you sent a lot of them off to Oklahoma, but they've come back because this is their home. So the senator just kind of looked at me and then he said, I need to see you after this meeting. I said, okay. So this meeting ended and I got called to his office. And I went up to his office and I knocked on the door. And the secretary looks at me and she says, now this is a secretary who's, at that time I was in my 40s, early 50s. This is a secretary who's probably about 25 years old. And she looks at me and she says, can I help you? And I said, yes, Senator Sharp asked me to come and see him. And she gets on the intercom and she says, Senator, there's an Indian out here who says that you want to talk to him. And I heard him on the intercom. Says, what's he look like? And she says, well, this boy, now she's a 20-some-year-old talking about a 40-year-old man. She says, this boy, and then described me. And he says, oh yeah, send him in. So I walk into his office and he looks at me and he says, you know, says, I understand you're a pretty well educated young man. And you were pretty articulate in that session down there. Let me give you some advice if you're going to get along in Texas. He says, if you took those beads off and cut your hair, you'd almost pass for a pretty fair Mexican. And I said, Senator, I'm going to continue to wear my beads because this is part of my culture. I'm not going to cut my hair because that's part of my spiritualness. And I don't want to be a Mexican, fair or not. And he looked at me and he says, well, then I don't know if we got a lot to talk about. Send me a written report on what you testified. And he sent me out of his office. That set the tone for many years working there in Texas. After they did away with Texas Indian Commission, I went back home and I was working for the Pueblo and later on became governor. I got a call one day from Suzanne and she says, we're getting ready to bring this suit against the Washington team. Do you want to be part of it? And I said, Suzanne, I want to be part of it, not just as part of NCAI, but also as a representative of my Pueblo, and more than that, as an Indian individual living in a state in a country that doesn't understand, that doesn't appreciate, that doesn't know what Indian people are and are about. I'm, in addition to the different things that I've done over my lifetime, I'm a veteran. I'm very proud of that. I asked an elder one time, I said, you know, I understand that American Indians have served in every war in this country since and including the War of Independence. I said, why? And that we've served in greater proportion on a per capita basis in a greater number than any other ethnic group, race, or nationality. And I said, knowing the history of how this country has treated us and what they've done to us and what they've attempted to do in getting rid of us, of our religion, of our culture, of our whole way of life, and even physically getting rid of us. Why should we and why do we participate in that manner? Why do we serve? And he said, Ray, he says, regardless of what this country has done, what these people have done to us over history, this is still our land. We may not be fighting for a specific flag or a specific government or a specific principle of international or national politics, but we are defending our land, our home, the base, the root of what we are. And that inspired me to turn around after my time in the military, and then afterwards to work with our people in the military, to work with veterans. That inspired me to fight for our culture, our religion, our heritage, and our history, and our children. And then Suzanne Harjo comes along into my life and says, Ray, you've got more things to do. And she inspired me to take on the chairmanship of the committee of the Human, Religious, and Cultural Concerns Committee and NCAI. And it was her inspiration and her invitation that got me involved in the case with the Washington team. And for that, I'm very grateful, Suzanne. I have never been able to come up with enough words to tell you how grateful I am that you invited me on this specific issue, on the issue of mascots and stereotypic issues about Native Americans.
Oh, thank you so much for saying that. That's really a wonderful thing for you to say, and I treasure that. I'm aware that a couple of people need to leave, and I'm going to ask Gabi Tayak if she has a question to pose to Norbert Hill, and those are two people who need to depart shortly, and maybe they could have a conversation for a moment.
Yeah, thank you. And this is such such a powerful group of minds, such heart minds that are here. And part of what I'm listening to, and Norbert, what an honor to be able to engage with you, and for everyone that's here. But what I've been listening to through the course of this conversation, to these reflections, is that you all sustained this work for a long time, it was 17 years, but there was also a moment that you had to get to where you were at that point. I mean, 1992, it's a symbol, it was a symbolic year, but there was really a convergence. And I wonder, within that group of people, what was it that you really took with you, or that was able, through this, like, I guess, Jody was talking about, this curated group of people, right? This particular group of people, some et al, others very obviously named, but what is it? What was it that you brought from that group, from that work with each other, that was able to carry you, and what you saw was able to continue to energize, right, under a lot of duress, obstacles, we've heard death threats being mentioned, other kinds of really difficult, just sustaining that for that long. If you could comment on that, I would really like to hear that, because I think that's an important lesson also for our upcoming generations. Is like, what does it take? What do you bring with you when you work with people to sustain this kind of vision and work over all these years?
Well, I was always honored to be able to work with other people that I admired, and just glad to have a seat at the table and learn from them. And I always thought that we're here for a reason, and that we should use those gifts, and that everybody has gifts of some sort. And so I think my wife says my epitaph would be, he was in a meeting. And I think if we all had a nickel for every meeting that we ever went to, that we'd be very well. But it was just, if I could have done this work for no money, I would have done it. It was such a blessing to be able to be a little bit of help to anyone, and to work alongside of them. It's still a work in progress, and there's so much I don't know, and there's so much left to do. And but as we look through a career, it used to be looking like yourself, looking through the windshield. I'm looking through the rearview mirror of saying, how does one pass the torch to young people? And people say, how long are Indians going to last? And somebody responded, saying, until the last song is sung. And I'm just inspired at Palos now to see young people at the drum. And so that gives me hope that we can continue on, with the work. I'm just pleased that I could be a little part of whatever parade I'm behind, and to be able to move it forward. Thank you for that question. It's a I never thought of it that way. Thank you.
Thank you. We're at it's really at the cusp of this generation, right? I mean, it's 30 years since 1992. That's a generation and a couple of babies, like a few babies ahead of us, right? It's seeing what generates forward. But yeah, I think, thank you, because it's not easy. You have so much going at you, but to be able to keep going, and evolving and changing.
Part of it is, and that I meant to say about Suzanne, it's the bullets in the front and arrows in the back. And to be in a leadership positions in any country, you really have to have a thick skin. And if you accept that proposition, you can move forward. And I think a lot of us have experienced that, and we've all taken our lumps, but we still get up every day and move forward.
Well, and this idea of involving young people, when we got our ruling from the federal district court that overturned the 3 trademark expert judges of the Trademark Trial and Appeal Board, which had handed us a tremendous victory in 1998, 99, just a unanimous decision. All 3 agreed that the trademark registrations for the Washington football team should be canceled. And that was everything we had asked. Our case wasn't about stopping the Washington NFL business from being racist. We were saying they can call themselves any. They can call themselves. Oh my. Am I sounding like a xylophone?
I think it was echoing from Marla's.
Oh, okay.
My apologies. I was switching to phone. I'm sorry about that. I tried to do it seamlessly. I apologize.
Thank you. I didn't mean to call you out, Marla. I just saw your box like
Okay.
up there.
Yeah. We were trying to well, we had won a tremendous victory, and what we had asked was that the federal government not sanction the racism that was being committed by the football business, but that it had to not reward the franchise with the continued exclusive privileges that come along with the trademark. And so our case was really about the federal sanctioning of racism and not about whether or not we could force a team to make a change. We weren't even trying to force the team to make the change. We were trying to remove the federal goodies from that racism and make it unattractive. So the federal, so we had this tremendous victory in 99, and that was great. And then we had a terrible judge in federal district court who just ran roughshod over them and us, and said that because Lone Star Dietz had been a coach and was a beloved coach and a full-blooded Sioux, none of which was true. He wasn't even a beloved coach. He served for 11 months. How beloved could you be? And it was a lie that he was Sioux. He was German on both sides, German American from Wisconsin, had never been to South Dakota where he claimed to be from. And all of this was built on a lie. Everything was built on a lie. I mean, we who were suing the Washington football team had to prove who we were. We had to demonstrate that we weren't imposters. They hired PIs to make sure that we weren't, and we weren't doing anything that was. In the meantime, they never, for 17 years of litigation, brought a Native person into court who could withstand, or any period. They never did, because they couldn't withstand the scrutiny that you have to go through when you're in litigation. You have to prove every syllable of what you say, and certainly what you say you are. So when we got this terrible ruling from the federal district court, we appealed it, of course, and the appellate court sent a question back. They didn't remand the case. They sent a question back to that judge, who really was just, I mean, her decision was just a regurgitation of the propaganda that the team put out. And it turned out that she was married to a lawyer whose law firm helped with PR for the Washington team. And when she gave us a particular answer, she happened to date it for Little Bighorn Day. And I have to think that that wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a coincidence, but I could be wrong. And it might have been a total coincidence. But what the question was from the appellate court was all of these, yes, we understand what you're saying, Judge, that some of these people waited too long to file the case after they turned 18. So, but presumably, and they were asking about the youngest of us, Mateo Romero, and they asked about him by name. They said, what about Mateo Romero? Because he was a toddler when they got their first trademark registration in '67. And they went further and said, presumably they're always going to be Native Americans. Yay, good that they said that. And presumably there will be Native Americans who are upset or offended by this name. Does Latches, the passage of time, does Latches run against them too? So I thought, aha, they're inviting a lawsuit of younger people. So they're going to rule against us. And which was so ironic because we thought we were stepping up as the older population, as the adult population. And what the judge did was to upend that and make us go for putting our young people in the position of leadership in such a really difficult situation. But I went out and recruited some Native young people who wanted to file the identical case, our case, except the plaintiffs would be different. And the new plaintiffs would be 18 to 24. So that was great. And at the same time, as we were preparing that case, and our lawyer was there, our lawyer before the Court of Appeals was the lead attorney for the young people coming in. I developed a third case, which never was filed, and it was people who had would have just turned 18. So not 18 to 24, but I was recruiting people and did recruit the new plaintiffs who were 17 years old and who would, at a common date, just within months of each other, after the last one turned 18, file as a group. That here come the people who are just now coming of age. No time has passed. So that was, and I started recruiting the first case group in 2005, and then they filed in 2006. And then I was working on the second case, but the Patent and Trademark Board ruled that they could file the case, they would accept the case, it would be logged in, and the plaintiffs would forever be 18 to 24. But they couldn't go forward with the case until the first case was ended. And we had lots of litigation to go. And so we had to drop the idea of that third case because we already had someone in the queue. And that was too bad, because that would have been a very important kind of message to the country, which is, and to our opponents, which was, it's not just us. We have pups. We have younger people and we have younger people. And in fact, without knowing what we were doing about that third case, which was necessarily a secret, one of their lawyers said, well, what's next? You're going to hand a lawsuit to everyone, every Native American as they turn 18? Oh, well, exactly. So we did end up bringing, when we concluded our case, the original case at the end of 2009, we had to reconstitute ourselves and bring in my son, Duke Harjo, and Robert Holden to be plaintiffs, as well as the rest of us, on a cleanup case that wasn't about cancellation of the lawsuit of the trademark, but was about how each of the requests that had stacked up at the Patent and Trademark Office would be handled. Each of the requesters who wanted to use that PR word, and we were able to consolidate that into one huge case. And the rest of us filed that in 2010, and were told what the young people had been told in 2006, which was you have to stand in line until the end of the young people's lawsuit for this one to go forward. And so we were still standing by when the Supreme Court mooted out our entire lawsuit by finding in a completely different case that what we had relied on for our cause of action was unconstitutional. It had been constitutional for everyone else who had used it, but no one had ever used it like we had. Ours was an unprecedented case, and we had unprecedented decisions on cancellation. So I'm not surprised that was the outcome. But we tried to involve Native young people in everything that we could, and I think they held up really well, given the pressures, lots of pressures on them, and they did a really good job. So altogether, we had a quarter century of litigation, and that's quite an amazing feat when you think of it. One person I'd like to bring into this discussion has joined us is Rick Hill, whose idea the 1992 alliance was, and so my role coordinating the 1992 alliance was really as a result of his idea about forming it, and then he was on the advisory committee when we were trying to make the world know who Columbus really was, and that some Native people were here, that this wasn't a blank hemisphere like they were trying to present. So hello, Rick. I'm glad you're here.
I have to tell you, I'm barely here because my cold is still getting to me, so I can't talk too long, but it's really good to see everybody. And I'll just throw my my bit in there to say that Suzanne really is the spark plug of Indian country. She's the one that gets things going and keeps energizing us to continue on. So I appreciate all that. I think part of 1992, we also spent some time talking about Wounded Knee in 1890. We did a panel in Santa Fe when I was there, and that really helped reintroduce to the younger kids this whole thing. We brought down some descendants of the survivors, and they gave a really great presentation. And I think that's what the important part is, that we're always trying to reach out to young people to say, this is your history, this is a legacy, this things you have to do. So kind of getting back to Gabby's question is that sometimes I wonder, where are the young people gone? Because, you know, back in the 60s and 70s, all the young people stood up and said, we're going to do this. We're not going to put up with this stuff anymore. And it was really did a lot of action. But now I see a lot of the young people are getting so worried about their grades at the university or their scholarship. I think I don't know. Sometimes I wonder that maybe they haven't learned the real lessons of history, that if you don't pay attention to these matters diligently and to coordinate that, you could lose a lot. I left the kind of like the national scene after working at the Smithsonian, which I also was involved with Suzanne. I moved back into my father's community in Canada and just started working in the trenches with the young people. I left the University of Buffalo, where I taught for 25 years with John Mohawk and Oren Lyons and Barry White, and that was really great. But what I realized is that we'd be lucky if we'd had 5 students in our class in a year. Go back on the reserve, you know, it's 100% kids, and there was a big difference because our own kids didn't understand their history, their culture, and a lot of them didn't understand their language. So I've been spending more time trying to mentor the people that are interested in listening. So in many ways, 1992 never ended because there was 1493, 1494, and we're going to continue go on. But I'll have to say that with all of the things that we did, sometimes, and I don't know if this is just me, but sometimes I get the feeling like maybe we didn't do good enough because there's still those hard-headed attitudes. You know, every year the white kids come to Native Studies at the same questions. I didn't know there was a treaty. I didn't know there was boarding schools. You know, I didn't know there was a trust fund. And it just makes you wonder, saying like, how many more times do we have to say this before it starts to catch on? But I guess what I've learned, one thing from Suzanne, is that you can never do enough. You got to keep trying. Try something else. Try something. So right now I'm kind of tackling a big matter. How do we get the Haudenosaunee national lacrosse team into the Olympics in Los Angeles in 2026, I think it is. They're going to reintroduce lacrosse as a sport in the Olympics. And we're saying you should have the originators of the game there at the time. So it's quite a challenge to get our passport recognized, to get our standing. But there's a big momentum across the country, across the world to support that. So stay tuned to that. Norbert, it's good to see you again. It's been a long time since you and I kind of made fun of everybody else as we spend our time together. But I also realize that the clock is ticking on all of us. So I kind of believe that we have to prepare our legacy for the future. When you think of all that work, all those meetings, all of those notes, all of that stuff that you've gathered, find a way to get that back in the hands of the young people rather than some archives that they'll never visit, because our people need to learn what we learned in going through this stuff. Like Suzanne with the 1992 Alliance and the big concert we did, and doing the programs and the events, it was a great learning. Or the event that we planned here, this declaration. You know, when I was reading it, I was thinking like, man, that's still true. It still rings true, and it's timeless. Unfortunately, it's timeless, meaning that a lot of those matters are still pestering our nation. A lot of those matters are still something we work at. Suzanne and I worked on many exhibitions and our work together at NMAI along with Norbert and a few others. But there was a big difference between having this big monumental edifice about us versus being in the community with us, if you know what I mean. And so I began to realize when I was working at NMAI, here we are spending, $300 million a year representing the indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere, and we didn't save one native language in the time that I was there. Not even one. And so getting back in the communities and realize how important this work is, how essential it is. Yet I agree with what Suzanne said too. Our young people are so amazing. They're vigorous, despite what I said earlier. Like, where are they? Well, they're in the longhouse. They're learning the songs and dances. They're doing the ceremonial speeches. They're stepping back on the land back movement. So I'm very encouraged and hopeful, because our young people are finally saying, not one more inch of land, not one more child, not one more broken treaty. We're not going to stand for this anymore. And I think there's the result, Suzanne, of all this work we did, that spark plug to build the fire inside these young people, to make them realize that this is a lifelong venture you're heading off. To be Indigenous means a lifelong struggle, but we have to do that for the sake of our relatives. And so anyway, I just wanted to share those few ideas. And my voice held out a little longer than I thought it would, so I'm going to turn it back to you.
Mark, I wonder if you and other Phil and Mary Catherine might have something to question Rick Hill about. You raised an important point, Rick, about the art shows that we did. We were doing guerrilla art shows, which was just finding any kind of venue. I mean, you had a great one there at IAIA in Santa Fe. I was trying to find venues in Washington, like the House and Senate rotundas, which was pretty great, having the first contemporary, first show of artwork by contemporary Native artists, by living artists, there in the great Senate and House rotundas. I love the exhibit you did in Santa Fe called Radicals and Renegades. And that introduced a lot of people to us as having to be outlaws, not as being outlaws because we wanted to be outlaws, but being forced into that position. So let me withdraw and leave this to our questioners.
I'm just curious, picking up on the conversation about young people. One of the things that seems to me has changed in 30 years is social media. And with that, the connection of people. You look at Alcatraz and folks were going to conferences after, but with Idle No More and Standing Rock, people were communicating in real time all the time. And I wonder how that changes in terms of the perception of young people and moving the story forward.
Well, let me respond to that, because I think you're right. And frankly, a lot of the work that you've done to help make that happen. You remember the old days, you'd wait for Akwesasne notes to come to your mailbox to find out what happened the previous month, or the other newspapers that we had. And now with the instantaneous communications on an event, but with that comes the risk of how authentic is that news that's coming to you, and how are the voices really reflecting what's going on there. So, but it does allow more people to more information. I just wish it was more of a dialogue on these matters. You know, it tends to be a little bit of a diatribe sometimes with the social media, and we need to put an issue out there and say, let's talk about this. What can we do about that? And so maybe it's more like we need an Indigenous intranet among ourselves, so we can reflect on that. I mean, there's a lot of chat groups on that, but you know, I was just thinking about that too the other day. I was looking at our old issues of Daybreak magazine that John and Oren and I produced, and Jose Barrero was our co-editor, and looking at the little, I forget what they called it, Indigenous Peoples Network, an old news service that they used to put out. everything's so, it seems so archaic now, you know, it's just like, but yet I treasure these things. I hate to throw them away because it's like there again, the archive of the events. And so but I also say that young people are so adept now at using the social media, digital technology. I mean, I have to turn to my 12-year-old all the time to figure out how to use my damn phone. So that'll master that, and who knows what kind of impact that'll have down the road.
You know, I'll just say, watching my class today, we sat for an hour and the students literally crafted a website, like threw up a website in the space of an hour, you know, and it's not public yet, but it looks pretty darn good. And it's so I agree, you know, I mean, their media savvy is so extraordinary. And it does feel to, I guess one of my questions is kind of thinking about this realm of art, literature, you know, short form videos, which seem to me like, you know, it feels to me like Native folks have kind of seized, you know, YouTube over the last, you know, X number of decades. You know, so I'm wondering if sort of thinking 30 years on, you know, or even 60 years on, 50 years on, right, whether we think that Native arts and literatures have more purchase, you know, in the sort of broader kind of cultural realm, if they're doing the kind of political work that I think a lot of times our authors and artists would like them to be doing, if we think that change has actually happened over the last 30 years, or if we're kind of, or whether we've always been good and vital in this particular space. I think there's an argument about that, you know, as well. So Rick, maybe you've got thoughts on that. Also, it's worth us noting my friend Rick Williams is also on, you know, here, and at some point we should say hi to him too.
Yes, indeed.
You can never have enough Ricks on a video. So. Well, because I spent a lot of my time in the contemporary art world, and then when I stepped back from that, left Santa Fe, left NMAI, and the field kind of moved on. So just the other day, I was looking at a Native art magazine, and again, it's truly amazing the creativity that our people had. We did an exhibit in Santa Fe in 1992. It's called "Creativity is Our Tradition," and that realized we've always had to problem solve visually, metaphorically, literally, and I think that's the skill that I see our young people have developed. But I noticed another thing too, is that the dynamics of our communities are changing. Ray mentioned, you know, about the number of urban natives, and let's just say there's a more vocal urban voice in the arts than maybe there was before, and so it's interesting to me how to reach out. Now look at. We're on the national network. You can get Native produced shows now on through your computer. So, and here in Canada, you'd be amazed at how much content, Native content, is being. Of course, the issue always comes up as to how I hate to say it, how authentic the producers of this are. But I think we can weed through all of that. There's more and more powerful stories. But I've been encouraging young artists. I said. Even though we're kind of talking about the Washington trademark, I said, let's get past the stereotype. If you let the stereotype hung up and define you, you can't get past that. Let's tell the story of our people as it is. But I notice a lot of modern media today puts out a new image of the dysfunctional Native. You know, and there's always the scenes of drinking and drugs and fighting and on and on. And I know that's a real part of some of our life, but you know, I'd sure like to see something that talks a little bit more about the joy of being Indigenous, or something that really encourages people, because otherwise this kind of depresses our students, right? They keep seeing all this negative persona laid out. Now, back in the 80s, we prided ourselves on producing angry young graduates, you know, because of what we taught about all of the betrayal and all of the massacres and all that stuff. But now I think we got to turn out a new generation of really enlightened problem solvers that are going to tackle these issues and find a way to keep their culture as the underpinning for the things that we do. So there's a lot of creativity going on. You know, even like I was watching that Reservation Dogs, I'm thinking like, what do my kids think about this? Seeing people in this, but they seem to be able to disassociate and just can suspend the reality for a while, enjoy that, enjoy the jokes and see what's going on. But in the end, I'm thinking like, what's the underlying message we're sending about the kind of people that we are? So I think a lot about that. And I think literature, film, art needs to address that a little bit more strongly.
Thank you, Rick, and thank you, Phil, for pointing out that Rick is there. I'm going to point out that Sally Williams is there, and my dear friend from our Native American Rights Fund days, and her husband, the fabulous Rick Williams. I think you're both on the same monitor and mic. Do you want to say hello and subject yourself to questioning by these good questioners?
I'm going to pop up first, and I want to thank you all for all that you do all the time. I mean, you never gave up. And one thing I remember I learned at the gathering was to be native to now. I mean, we've heard everyone always say, well, we learned from the past. We have to always plan for the future, plan for 7 generations. And you got to do it now. I mean, and what blew me away about the gathering was that the incredible natural native intelligence possessed by all the participants. I know Native people like to talk, but there was a chance to do that. I just came on because I came with Rick. Oh, the reason I need to go was I have a whole bunch of loud grandchildren coming in. And but you did what you did, and you had the opportunity to talk, and the opportunity to share knowledge, and the opportunity to commit to what you were doing and what everybody was doing. And all the young people that were there are now all have white hair, you know, but it was awesome. So I have some really smart grandkids. As Rick said one time, we have a grandson named Vine who's a savant, and he's here. So, but bless you all. It was a joy. Hello, grandson. It blew me away coming, and was able to help me for the next 20 some years in my job. You know, I got to work with natural resource people, and what I learned from the conference, and probably from Jody, was how to set up events and meetings, because that was perfect. So, and then it was awesome. You know, we brought our child along, and she's doing great things. And, you know, the early morning sunrise ceremony, you know, she's 35 and she still remembers it. She was 5. However, I lost her at that conference for about 10 minutes, and then found her sound asleep on Mildred Cleghorn's lap. But there were so many personal things, and keep going. And again, is never give up. Bless you all.
Oh,
it's wonderful having a partner with you in a journey, and the journey after our gathering in Santa Fe was very inspirational to me. And I stayed in education. I left the University of Colorado because there was no future there. Became the leader of the American Indian College Fund, worked there for 16 years. During that time, I had a chance to meet Eloise Cabell and talked her into doing a set aside in the Cabell case, where we got a scholarship fund. And when I left the American Indian College Fund, we had $66 million in the bank, 34 million endowed. And I can proudly say that I left a trail of scholarships behind as I moved on, but I haven't stopped yet. I'm taking on all kinds of, in Colorado, we got the mascots out of all the schools last year. I worked on getting 2 proclamations rescinded. It took me a year and a half to get the governor's attention to do away with a proclamation that called for Colorado citizens to kill Indians and take their property, and it was still the law in the books. Right after that, I decided that, we needed to do more. And so we got together, I put together some really good people, and right now we're doing a truth, restoration, and education commission in Colorado to tell the truth about the genocide here. We didn't choose the word reconciliation because you can't have reconciliation if there's no conciliation to begin with. Just this last week, we got the name Evans. It's going to be removed from the mountain. Before that, we had an S mountain that we were dealing with. The state legislature this last time we dealt with an antagonistic governor who was going to veto our murdered and missing Indigenous women's bill. So at every turn, we're still fighting out here. We're still fighting, taking it on. One of the things that we learned, and nobody's ever said anything about this, it's a Sand Creek massacre. There were children that were taken, and they were never accounted for. We're learning this in our research, and we're learning about how they were poisoning Indians with arsenic and strychnine out on the plains during, it's supposed to be, this warfare. Well, their warfare was germ warfare. So it's all these kinds of things that we're learning, and just moving forward, we're just going to keep going. One of the things that we're doing is kind of unique, is as part of our Truth, Restoration, and Education Commission, we're doing a historic economic loss assessment. Well, what's that mean is we're looking at 8 areas of the economy: the loss of the buffalo, the loss of land, the loss of productive land. And to give you an example of what it looks like, just in the little corner of Colorado where the Kiowas were part of the Medicine Lodge Treaty, that land, just that land alone, is worth $100 billion today. So the magnitude, and I think that's the kind of stuff we have to keep continuing to do, to get in their face, to get the attention, to get the kind of changes. And I'm gonna close with this. I'm also doing land grant stuff. I'm taking on the land grant colleges. CSU has $590 million in endowment that came off of stolen land, and we're trying to get them to come clean. Other institutions across the United States need to do the same thing. One of my big hopes is that we have a very difficult legislature that, particularly around taxes. It's called it, and there's a bill called the Tabor bill that keeps you from being able to add money to the coffers. So I came up with this idea that we're going to try to get legislation passed to add $100 closing cost fee to every real estate transaction in the state because of the loss of land. And if we do that, there were over 400,000 transactions last year. If we accomplish that, that'll be putting about $40 to $50 million of revenue into the hands of Indian people here in Colorado. And our intent is we're going to bring the people back to Colorado. We want the Cheyennes and Arapahoes back in their homeland. Thank you.
I don't know about everyone of my fellow citizens of the Cheyenne and Arapaho tribes in Oklahoma. I'm not ready to go back to Colorado. Not yet, but keep proving yourselves there. I thought it was a really great thing that the commission in Colorado decided to make a recommendation to the governor to drop the name of Evans, the former governor, who was one of the genocidal maniacs responsible for Sand Creek, and to replace it with something that was recommended first by one of our Arapaho citizens as the Blue Skies. Well, the Arapahoes are the Blue Skies. And he asked his workmate there, one of our Cheyenne chiefs, how that name would go, how it would be with the Cheyennes, and so our chief said to him, it would be just fine because one of our important Cheyenne ceremonies translates into blue sky. So that's the reason that they settled on that change. So it would be Mount Blue Sky and instead of Mount Evans. And Evans is a real dirty word to us. It's as dirty as Custer or any of these horrible people's names that we've been able to rid the landscape of in some areas. One thing that was on our 1992 list was to change the name of the Custer battlefield. And we just forged ahead and took an opportunity in 1990 to do that. We had been talking about it, trying to do it, thinking about it, looking for an opening for 20 years. And all of a sudden there was an opening. And before we knew it, we were able to get that changed. And it wasn't easy. And we took a lot of heat, especially from the Custer buffs who are reenactors of the battle, except they win in the end. That's how they reenact it. And they did things like they banned all books by Indian people. Vine Deloria's Custer Died for Your Sins, of course, was banned. And every book that he wrote until 1990 was banned. And even historians like Alvin Josephi and straight histories of the Nez Perce, for example, his books were banned because he was an Indianist. And I mean, these Custer buffs were a piece of work. One said he was the reincarnation of Elizabeth Custer, Custer's wife. And the others, another said he was the reincarnation of Major Reno's horse. So this is who we were dealing with. So it's no wonder we won. And we got not only an Indian memorial, but we got we got the name of Custer gone. And there's another example. One day it was the Custer battlefield, the only one in the whole system that was named after an individual, let alone the loser of the battle. And it went to a neutral thing that we had proposed, which was and is the Little Bighorn National Battlefield Monument. So it warms my heart that you're doing all that great work in Colorado, Rick, and go get them. So thanks so much. Does anyone else have a question for Rick?
It's the other Rick. I had a question. I really like this idea, this transaction fee, because like you said, it really does add up. What did you have to do to get that into a reality?
Well, it's still not a reality. It's going to take, we're probably going to have to raise about $2 million to do a statewide referendum to get it passed. And, you know, but we're building ally support across the state. I think that it's one of those things where it's time that the people in Colorado are starting to be a little bit more liberal and understanding about the amount of land that was taken from the Cheyenne and Arapaho. And, you know, we have a group in Boulder called the Right Relationship people of Boulder, and we're starting to build allies around the state. It's going to take a while, but you know what? It's a dream, and if you stop dreaming and stop thinking that way, then we'll never win. there's so much that we can do that we don't realize that, we have the power to do. We're going to be sponsoring a youth treaty conference in the spring, where we bring all the college students in Colorado and in the Denver metro area high school students and have them learn about their treaties, have them take copies of their treaties home so that it becomes real to them and it's no longer something that's abstract. The other thing that we're doing is we're changing the narrative, this whole thing about critical race theory. Well, what we're doing, we're telling the truth. This, we're not dealing with theories. We're doing, we have a CRT, and we call it the critical reality truth. We're not dealing with theories. We're dealing with the truth, because the truth in Colorado is horrific.
Okay, you're making it easier to think about coming back. Jody, I wonder if you would talk about some of the efforts that you're engaged in to try to reclaim the Black Hills, for example, and to do all the work that's being done, the good work on language reclamation.
So I would say that I sent a note to Suzanne, like my introduction was pretty self-deprecating. We did a lot of good stuff during the Obama administration, and I'm really proud of the work that we did. And I would say that it was a team effort. I also would say that because of I guess you would say, I didn't know DC very well during the Obama administration. And I would say that was a blessing, because what people would ask for was not what they wanted. They asked for what they had normally gotten. And that was pretty clear from the beginning. People would ask, like, we want to have a meeting with OMB, and they were thinking like these really low level branch examiners is what they are called, at the very bottom. And so I organized the first meeting with OMB and tribal leaders, and it was the deputy of OMB. So it was the number 2 person in charge. And the tribal leaders came in and they were like, what are we doing? Like, how did you get this meeting? But it was just because there was like no question that we should be at that same level, because it was nation to nation. And I went into the White House like saying that, you guys said this, and so you better do it. I wasn't like, I guess, I wasn't accustomed to what people were used to getting. And that was a really good thing. And even when we would talk about budgets, it was easy for me to just demand and say, this is what the president wants, not knowing that like it's really hard to get budget increases. And I was just going through some paperwork back there. And when I left my last year, and I don't want to like talk too much about, I don't like talking about what I did, but the last year I was in the White House, I did have, we had an increase of about 8% in the overall budgets that went to Native youth, which was pretty amazing. I could tell you all the things that went wrong with that increase, but I also think that I'm hypercritical of myself, because I think we could be doing better. I mean, we could be doing a lot better in terms of the treaty obligations that are continuously ignored through time. So just in terms of the question that you asked, Suzanne, I want to say that like we did a lot of work, and I say we, because it's not just me. It wasn't just me. It never was just me. I mean, I had a lot of people that I talked to right here on this call, like Suzanne and Rick Williams and others, who were always there for advice and just brainstorming. And it's fun because right now I'm in that position of being able to visit on a regular basis people that are in the administration and kind of help have discussion, just private discussions about what the possibilities could be. So in terms of Black Hills, I think it's really just something that I think we all are born into being a Lakota person, that this is really important that we get these sacred places back, these sacred lands back. And so I had been working on this and studying it when I was in college, also looking at tribal governance structures, just from the perspective of different leaders who most of them are gone, but just trying to understand what, how I could help contribute to what is sort of like a, I don't know, some people call it in the Washichu world, the Holy Grail, like we want our Black Hills back. And so there is a movie that there's a film that I'm involved in. It's called the Lakota Nation versus the United States. And it's gonna be out on Hulu next year, but they're trying to make a run for the Oscars over the next year. It's produced by a guy named Ben Hedin, and he did MLK and the FBI. But most of the rest of, like, he was a producer, but the director, Jesse Shortbull, he went to film school at IAIA, and there's a number of other people, like the whole movie is starring natives. It's all in the voice of the natives, of Lakota people mostly. I think Mary Catherine Nagel is in there, and so this is something that can galvanize outside support. So inside support is a lot harder, I think, than making the case that the United States should give us back. And I'm just saying this because of how colonialism has been probably extraordinarily effective in dividing the Lakota people from becoming unified under various causes. I think No Apple was quite the exception. And so I keep saying that it is possible in this modern age that we can come together and unify. And so last year we were involved in to get the tribes to form a Section 17 organization called Ocheti Shakowee Land Trust, and to start moving towards doing some of the things that the government was open to, such as co-management for certain, parks like Wind Cave, or getting into the conversation and trying to push the needle on creating land management plans for the Black Hills. And this has been ceased. We stopped doing this effort because some of the traditional leaders didn't want to have us focus so much on an IRA government. And that's a pretty strong sentiment. And then the IRA governments, and they're not all IRA, I get corrected. Standing Rock isn't IRA. It's actually, it rejected the IRA, but they still have the similar kind of constitution as the rest of the IRA tribes. But nonetheless, it's been a real, I guess, just a trying to get people to come together. The movie is coming out, so there's going to be a wonderful opportunity to do a social impact campaign. So I continue to talk to the tribal leaders and try to get in front of them and talk to them about coming together as, the 6 nations that were in the litigation who won, in 1980, Supreme Court ruled in favor of the tribes. And as you remember, we were awarded about, I think it was $200 million, which is now over $1 billion. And we won't take it. Like, the tribes aren't going to take it. So that's the journey, or the story that's in the movie. It's been screening in Tribeca. I just went to LA this past weekend to screen it again at the Skins Fest film festival. We've gotten a lot of really wonderful feedback on it. And there's been billionaires that have been contacting me saying, how do we get this back for the tribes? There's a lot of people that are very, very interested in helping the Lakota people. And I think it begs for an organization, or begs for some kind of at least what Bears Ears did is they just did a coalition. They didn't do any kind of strict governance structure. They just came together as tribes, and I think they might have an MOU, but mostly they just meet and then they direct staff. So that's something that I'm trying to put in place. And the other thing is that with the language efforts, the work that we've been doing, well, I've been doing other land back things as well, which I think we're going to try to publish something. I can't say who, because it's a group of people that I've been working with, and it started because during the campaign season, everybody's like, what do we want from the government? And like Cato and Heritage and all these people already have EOs and presidential memoranda drafted up. They just, Trump signed the no DAPL easement the first day he was in. I mean, he didn't sign the easement, but he signed the directive to the Army Corps the first day he was in there. So what can we do as to position ourselves better after having been inside the White House, knowing what you can do and what you can't do, the limitations of politics and chits and all of that. The first 100 days are extraordinarily important, and we don't have really clear, I guess you could say you can walk in. I was just looking at the Obama 08 campaign promises. I didn't even get that. I was the first person in the White House. I didn't get it till a year later. And so like, I'm coming in there trying to like figure out what to do. There should be people or some kind of push that's coming from thinkers in Indian country to position themselves on like using existing authorities or using this time, this 100 days when somebody like Biden comes in there to push something. So we did get some stuff, got Keystone. Normally we never got anything. Like before we never even got like, we never got anything. I was looking at some of the archives, and there's been hardly any strategists in these roles, even during the Clinton age, the Clinton age. So you go in, you get burned out and fried. There's nobody to catch you, nobody to like tell you what to do. You have to figure it out when you show up. And so I was looking at, we were looking at like, okay, so if we really do want land back, what does that mean? What's the full spectrum of what's needed to get land back? For all the way from like what I call land back light, that's co-management. That's like learning familiarity, refamiliarizing ourselves with these different spaces. And the government kind of pays us, and Forest Service, you get to pick up sticks on roads and stuff. And it's not like really what we would consider land back, all the way to full possession. And could that be tribal trust? And then like there's a whole discussion around that of like, so these are discussions that we're having about, is tribal trust actually freedom? Is that actually possession? It's not. And some people like Jode Gowdy calls perfect title. He talks about perfect title. There's also Aboriginal title that everybody can agree that we have a relationship with the land that's very different than the Europeans. And so intellectually, what does that mean? And then how does that manifest itself if you have a favorable president again? If in 2024, we walk in there and we have like, okay, we're going to get our sacred lands back. At minimum, can we protect sacred places? At minimum, can we protect some of the burial grounds and some of the places that have energies that we know shouldn't be abused? And so can we at minimum do that? So how do you do that? And are there existing authorities that we can already use? And the answer is yes, absolutely. There's already authorities, and people point to different occasions, like, the Yakima, the Blue Lake, like why aren't these things happening more? Really, there's, legal analysis that needs to take place, and people have to really just focus their time and attention on the macro picture, which isn't being done right now. Macro picture of what can happen. And just, I'll just give you one example. The GSA constantly, if you just look at private corporations, they're always getting land from the federal government. How are they doing that? It's GSA excess. There are two different types of ways that you can do it. One is the GSA excess. And so they do this excess property authority. They use this excess property authority, and then they say, let's just put this land up. And so there's rules and regulations and how that process works. And one of the agencies can say, we want it. The Department of Interior, Deb Haaland, can say, we want it. And then Deb Haaland can say she has an IRA authority that's never used, and she can restore that to a tribe or a coalition of tribes if it's a disputed property. So there's already things that they can use. There's a bunch of 638 authorities where people can move tribal property into tribal trust if the IHS or the BIA own it. And you've seen different examples of this. And so this idea of land back is like an idea. It's like a campaign slogan, but like, how do you really get into the substantive part of that? And how do tribes start focusing their attention? Because you don't want to like tease the tribes and say there's this authority there, but the government's not going to use it. Like right now, today, this Biden administration will not use that authority, even though they could. They'll probably use it for the 38 stuff because that's easier. But just in terms of the political will it's not going to be there, especially because the House has taken over. So how do we position ourselves? How do we best position ourselves to be in the most ultimate, like fabulous position to have an EO in the first 100 days? Perfect. Let's just assume perfect condition. That's the dream state. Like, let's just do that. Let's do that. Let's just think about it. Let's dream about it. And let's just say it's going to happen, because then it will. Then we can like not just ask for like permanent reauthorization of Indian healthcare authorization, but we can start looking at these bigger picture questions. So then there's like, well, everybody always says we need to change Congress. We need to like change the authorities. We have to get into the political battles and stuff like that. And yes, we do. So that's more work for somebody, but like, let's think about the how to in some of these other areas. There's like probably there's like a list, there's FLIPMA, there's FLITFA, there's a bunch of authorities that are potentially ways through, but the part that we need the most is this political will. We need the political will from somebody, and that's the other part of the work, is to how do we do that, and how do we make allies, because it can't be just us. We need other people. And so those are some of the things that I'm working on with people who are very influential, who are involved, influential, care. And believe it or not, there are a lot of people who are seeing that this world is going to blow up if they do something different. They're like, you guys know what to do. How can we help you? And not like, how do they extract from us, but how can they help us? And I always say, so people are most interested in land. The full spectrum of that is like, after we take possession, how do we continue, maintain and have adequate resources and science and TEK and all of that to continue healing, and don't have healing ways with our regulations now with Indian land, especially in the ag part in the BIA. So how do we heal our land? How do we heal our land and get everybody to have forests like this is like Menominee and Yakima? Like, how do we do that? Because there's tribes that are absolutely the best foresters in the United States, in the world. How do we get adequate resources to make those resources perpetual and not market driven, but landscape driven, species relative driven? So that's another piece, but most important to the conversation about the land is the language, because the language is what informs how do we do the care of it once we have it. The language is the code. It's the language has hardwired instructions on how to treat beings, how to be in a particular place with all of the understandings of medicines, the animals, the waters, the winds, the trees, like everything moves together. And that's best understood from the perspective of the language. So the language is only, we only have like, for some tribes, for Lakota people, my sister works in language revitalization. We probably have like 10 years before we hit the massive cliff of not having any fluent speakers, 10 to 20, maybe 15 years, 15. That's because we are not producing, nobody's producing new fluent speakers in Lakota country. And that's the biggest nation. I hope Navajo is, I hope Pueblos are, I hope somebody is, because it's not happening because of the social media. Somebody talked about social media, but we're in a dire crisis for all of this understanding of how to be in a place on land for our grandchildren that we've always taken for granted, that is on the verge of being gone. And in that space, the people who are doing it like scratching and clawing every single day. And there's nobody in the boarding school conversation saying language, we need to have fluent speakers produced in language. In the boarding school conversations with Deb Howland, people are so hurt. I'm not mad at anybody for this, but I've been trying to work with the language people who are trying to produce speakers to get in those conversations at the boarding school, but we don't have the organization in place to be that, to hold that advocacy, to be responsible for that very clear vision. Not like, I don't want to, I mean, it doesn't matter if we know our colors and numbers, like we need fluent speakers to be produced and to be taught by elders, not to be taught. And, you know, I'm not knocking people who don't have their language anymore, but we can still learn from our elders. There's only a short period of time. So we need to like have everything towards that. And there are people who are reviving the language from their languages from no speakers, but ideally you'd want to have them to be. So I've taken a ton of time, but trying to get the language barriers in various respective communities to work with First Nations Development Institute and trying to like, let's go guys, let's make this a top priority of the boarding school initiative. Let's make this the #1 thing that we go after, that we have. And that is like key and culture, but the culture stuff is the most important stuff that is specific to tribes, and it doesn't need money and it doesn't need government, but it needs to be the heart of both land and language. So that's sorry, I kind of went off there.
Oh, no, don't apologize. That was fabulous.
And
Yeah.
I just have to say that this is all inspired by our nations, like our visions. The work that I do is still the hardest thing to do. When I was in the Obama administration, is protect sacred sites. The hardest thing to do was to prioritize Native languages because they are actually anti-colonial. That's why they're the biggest symbols of colonial. The way that they've oppressed us has been through this like complete like strip it all, take it all away, and make it go away. And the other thing is that it's still set up that way. And these are these little, tweaks that I work on is, I mean, not many people know, but National Park Service only prohibited Native Americans from gathering all the way up until 2016. Only Native Americans were singled out. You cannot gather any medicines or any plants in national parks as Native people. It was like said Native American in the regulation. And the other one is there's a thing called payment in lieu of taxes. So they give counties money to have federal lands, and they always say Indian lands are federal lands, but not if you're paying the county. So they set up a system where the counties hate it when Indian land becomes Indian land because they lose tax base, and then they're mad because it just sets up a contentious relationship. That's still not addressed, and nobody wants to give county people money to have Indian land, but it creates the whole cowboys and Indians dynamic of like the counties really don't like Indians, especially their Indian tribes. I mean, especially they're paid not to like us by the federal government.
That came into play when we were trying to get Zuni heaven back into Zuni control. And this was a long, long time ago. And Senator Barry Goldwater was our sponsor. He was our champion on this. And Navajo County, not Navajo people, but Navajo County, where this land was, said they wanted payment in lieu of taxes. We want PILT money. And they decided that they should get $600 million. And everyone just laughed at them because they're never going to get $1 of tax money. So how can they claim that this would be in lieu money when there's nothing to begin with? So it's a ruse that they throw up because they haven't developed the land to any extent, and they're lying about that and saying, if we were to develop the land, then PILT money would go for this. Anyway, fortunately, in that case, there was a strong senator who said, no, you don't get to do that. You're not getting a penny. And they said, oh, okay. And that was the end of that discussion. And the Zuni Heaven bill went through. So that was that. What you're pointing to is so important, that we've been taken advantage of in so many ways and over so long a period of time, that there are people in and out of government who think it's their entitlement to take advantage of us, or they think that they actually have the authority to do it, as with the Park Service. So what you have been teaching about is very important, what we need to do in the future. I put a thing in the chat just since boarding schools were mentioned. Please, everyone, when you have discussions about boarding schools, insist that every bit of burials, every bit of burial grounds, cemeteries, graves, be memorialized, federally memorialized. It's all hallowed ground, and should be memorialized as such. And don't let the agencies or the schools or private developers get away with clearing the land and repatriating. And now we don't need any of these former cemeteries. Yeah, we do, because the spirits are there, and that is hallowed ground, and it should always be in every one of these boarding schools and former boarding schools. So let me know how you do with those discussions, please. Mark, I think you need to close us out. Is that where we're at with this particular session? I can't thank you enough for this collaboration and for us reflecting on this, and you know, as always happens, when you look back, you look forward. So
I
thank
love
you.
that, looking forward in all of this. It's been great. And one of the things I was thinking about listening to all this is, why do we have to wait for a marker like 30 years? This could be the kind of conversation that we just have from time to time and bring people together and maybe widen the circle in different ways. And then anyway, that's what I would like to. First, let me just thank everyone for being a part of this, both those who are still on the call and those who've had to leave. And of course, thank you to Suzanne and Jody both for coming up with this idea and insisting that it be done. I think the timing of it is flawless because this is a perfect week for people to be thinking about issues like this and to bring it into conversations in ordinary homes. And I hope that we can get the word out in the next few days. This will be archived, of course, so it'll go out on Wednesday as it's promised, but it'll also go beyond that and live in ways that I think will be a great host for ideas. So thank you so much, Suzanne.
Thank you.
And that's it for ICT. So thank you.